Vietnamese government prioritizes macroeconomic stabilizations in 2015. Prospects for more cooperations in agriculture between Vietnam and New Zealand. Another week has gone by, and here we are again in this edition of Bizline by VTV International. You're with me, Minh Hằng, and first up, let's take a look at the highlights from last week's economic scene. The government's major task in 2015 will focus on ensuring macroeconomic stabilization and keeping inflation in check, aiming to attract more investment and stimulate economic development. Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng was speaking on December 2nd at the Vietnam Business Forum 2014, an official dialogue channel between the government and the business community. Meanwhile, representatives of several foreign chambers of commerce in Vietnam commented on the need for administrative reform, quicker SOEs restructuring, better skilled labor force, etc. to prepare for the upcoming free trade agreements expected to be signed next year. The European Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, or EuroChams, on Monday officially launched the 7th edition of its White Book of Trade and Investment Issues and Recommendations. The publication aims to summarize for the Vietnamese government key issues regarding the business climate that affect European companies in Vietnam. Its contents span a number of major industries that the EuroChams' nearly 800 members operate in. The key issues identified in the White Book include the free trade agreement between the European Union, or EU, and Vietnam, education and training, taxations, and intellectual property rights, as well as administrative requirements, implementations, and enforcements of the legal framework and market access. The book remarked that the EU is the second largest trade partner of Vietnam, with a total trade of 24.2 billion euros. The Vietnam Development Partnership Forum 2014 opened this Friday here in Hanoi. Co-chaired by Minister of Planning and Investment Bùi Quang Vinh and World Bank Country Director Victoria Khoa Khoa, and in the presence of Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng, the forum saw discussions of market institutional reforms and private sector development. Delegates stressed the importance of having a sound legal framework and actual implementations for reform. Regarding the private sectors, Vietnam's development partners and embassies representatives underlined SOE's restructuring as it will create a level playing field for all enterprises. Moreover, more support policies are needed for the private sector to benefit from spillover effects from FDI enterprises in the coming years. Vietnam's economic growth is expected to improve from 5.4% in 2013 to 5.6% in 2014, according to the World Bank's Taking Stock report released on Tuesday. The report shows early signs of Vietnam's economic recovery. GDP growth picked up to a relatively brisk 6.2% year-on-year in the third quarter of last year, contributing to an overall growth rate of 5.6% for the first 9 months of the year. This positive outlook is largely due to the country's ongoing macroeconomic stability and strong performance of the foreign invested manufacturing export sector. However, the domestic private sector remains subdued, as reflected in the rising number of domestically owned businesses that have closed or suspended operation. The report also highlights a complex array of institutional and regulatory factors that are responsible for the recent weak performance of the financial sector, but at the same time praises the Vietnamese government's efforts to tackle these issues through a number of amended laws. Vietnam's HSBC Manufacturing Purchasing Managers Index, or PMI, expanded to 52.1 in November, rising from 51 in October and indicating a strong improvement in business conditions since May. Since September, the manufacturing conditions have witnessed significant improvements. According to HSBC's survey, output has increased on the back of customers' demand. In addition, export contracts have risen for the last 3 months at their fastest pace since April. HSBC's experts are positive about the PMI, as it shows the manufacturing industries in Vietnam is becoming more competitive. Ho Chi Minh City, the largest southern economic hub, has attracted $3.15 billion in foreign direct investment or FDI in the first 11 months of this year, according to a report from the city's People's Committee. The figure represented an increase of 95.3% compared with the same period last year. The city licensed 370 new FDI projects with a total investment capital of $2.78 billion in the period, down 10.2% in terms of projects, but up 194.6% in capital year-on-year. Samsung Group's Samsung CE Complex project alone has an investment capital of $1.4 billion, accounting for 50.4% of the total newly registered capital. We have just reviewed several highlights from last week's economic scenes. Still ahead in the program, we'll talk more about the prospects of cooperations in agriculture between Vietnam and New Zealand in our crosstalk. New Zealand's Special Agriculture Trade Envoy Mike Peterson began his first official visit to Vietnam on Monday, December 1st. The visit highlights New Zealand's commitment to its developing relations with Vietnam, particularly in the areas of trade and agriculture. It is an opportunity to develop further understanding of each country's agriculture trade interests. In the studio today, we are pleased to welcome Mr. Mike Peterson, New Zealand's Special Agriculture Trade Envoy, to discuss current and future agricultural cooperation between the two countries. And before we start, let's take a look at the following short clip.
Vietnam and New Zealand established diplomatic relations in 1975. With respects to agriculture and trade, New Zealand and Vietnam have a well-developed relationship. Both countries are parties to the ASEAN-Australia-New Zealand FTA, which took effect in 2010, and are currently negotiating the Trans-Pacific Partnership and Regional Economic Comprehensive Partnership. Through the New Zealand Aid Program, New Zealand and Vietnam also supports the development of Vietnam's agriculture sector with programs focusing on value-added agriculture and livestock production that benefits farmers, develops the capabilities of small and medium enterprises, and draws on best practice and innovative New Zealand experience and expertise.
First of all, it's a pleasure to have you in our studio with us today. Now, as a New Zealand Special Agriculture Trade Envoy, could you please share with us the big pictures of agriculture sector of New Zealand?
Certainly. Look, we're very fortunate in New Zealand. We've got a strong heritage in agriculture, and we really are now looking at an incredible opportunity worldwide, particularly for food-producing nations. So we have an agricultural sector in New Zealand that is based on a grass-fed, naturally raised, free-range system, and so we have quite a unique offering when it comes to our products when they come to the market. Our reputation's good, it's very strong for high quality products, and so we really are looking at every opportunity we can to get better access into world markets.
What has been the new trend or innovations in sustainable agriculture development in New Zealand?
Yes, there's a lot happening around agriculture. Certainly when we see the technology that's applied to agriculture these days, we're seeing very, very smart science that's also creating smart farming systems, and then also developing the people to a much higher standard than we've seen before. Okay. So we're seeing a real focus on innovation, and then alongside that, a real drive for sustainable farming and making sure that we have sustainable intensification of agriculture. That's probably the biggest trend that we're facing at the moment is how do we manage the profitability of farming alongside the sustainable requirements that not just customers in New Zealand are looking for, but customers offshore.
Could you elaborate more on the current challenges that New Zealand's agriculture sector is facing?
We have lots of challenges in New Zealand still, and it's particularly for New Zealand, our reputation as a supplier of quality, safe food is one that we really want to stand behind. Okay. We need to spend a lot of time on making sure we can justify to our customers and to discerning consumers that exactly what we produce is exactly what they want. And so traceability, is very important. We spend a lot of time on that, and the animal welfare and sustainability issues as well.
How has agricultural reforms and management been carried out in New Zealand?
We went through a very tough time back in 1984 when the New Zealand government was actually on the verge of bankruptcy. The reforms in New Zealand happened very quickly because of the decision that was taken to remove subsidies to farmers overnight. And so what then happened was the market effectively worked by making sure that we responded to consumer needs as accurately as possible. We saw the processing sector really having an innovation drive to become as efficient as possible. And then we also saw farmers really looking to become the most efficient farming and business managers that they could. We also at the same time opened up our borders to allow all the products of the world to come into New Zealand. So we now have a very open market economy, and it was tough at the time, but when I talk to farmers today, I don't meet a single farmer who would go back to the way it was before.
Vietnam and New Zealand share many common aspects in terms of agriculture. Both countries began their overall agricultural renovation back in the 1980s, with Vietnam starting in 1986 and New Zealand in 1984. Currently, both countries are among the world's top agricultural nations, renowned for various products. However, although Vietnam and New Zealand may differ in terms of what they produce, they boast great potential in agricultural cooperation.
In terms of advantages, I think actually we're quite complementary, Vietnam and New Zealand. So we don't produce the same things. And if we think about Vietnam and its strategic position in this part of the world, the fastest growing region in the world, the region where we're seeing the fastest growth in terms of demand for food and things like that. The advantage of Vietnam and New Zealand partnering together is we can work together to help to feed this region.
Realizing this potential for agricultural cooperation, more and more dialogues, conferences and arrangements have been made over the last few decades at various levels, with the latest one being the roundtable meeting between Vietnam's Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development and New Zealand's Special Agriculture Trade Envoy. The main focus of the discussion was agricultural trade policy, with related areas including two-way import-export policies, the importance of the agriculture sector in ongoing trade negotiations, namely the Trans-Pacific Partnership or TPP and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership or RCEP, food safety and control, technology development and value-added products.
Vì cái buổi đầu tiên cho nên mới khởi xướng ra một cái hợp tác mới về cái việc đối thoại về chính sách, mà cái chính sách là New Zealand rất có kinh nghiệm chuyển biến trong cái cải cách nông nghiệp từ một cái nền sản xuất nông nghiệp sang một cái hướng là nền sản xuất hàng hóa ở cái đỉnh cao của thế giới, với những cái sản phẩm mà chiếm lĩnh thị trường thế giới, hàng đầu của thế giới. Nhiều cái bài học mà New Zealand thực hiện cách đây 30 năm với Việt Nam vẫn còn rất là có ý nghĩa, mà cái cuộc đối thoại chính sách này sẽ là cái khởi đầu cho những cái việc mà trao đổi, học tập kinh nghiệm, và cái điều quan trọng nhất là tạo cái hành lang pháp lý để cho cái việc là thu hút đầu tư vào nông nghiệp, hỗ trợ nông dân sản xuất theo những quy trình để đáp ứng được những cái thị trường cao cấp để tăng cái giá trị cho nông sản và phát triển ổn định.
Vietnam is currently working towards a more value-added agriculture sectors. So how can New Zealand's reformed experience be applied for Vietnam?
Well, I think there are a number of examples in New Zealand where we could look to Vietnam. One of the things that we've seen in New Zealand has been, with our resources being fully utilised, we're now looking at how we can add value to the products that we produce out of New Zealand. And so there are a number of lessons we've learned around traceability, around adding value, around differentiating our products and marketing them well, that other exporting countries could certainly look to learn from.
Can you be a little bit more specific and, give us some example about those products that you have mentioned?
Yes, certainly. We've got a number of products, particularly right across the meat industries, the dairy sector, the horticulture sector and the wine industry that needed to take the jump out of being a commodity exporter into more added value products. And a number of those industries have done that very successfully, and it certainly has been a focus, because we know that if we're just in the commodity business, it's a business that won't increase the wealth of our farmers.
Trade is an important part of the bilateral relationship between New Zealand and Vietnam. At the end of June 2014, total two-way goods trade increased from $649 million to $769 million, a 23% increase from 2013. Trade in agriculture products is an important part of this. New Zealand exports to Vietnam are predominantly dairy products with 52%, followed by wood products with 11%. Meanwhile, New Zealand's imports from Vietnam are more varied, with steady growth in the imports of a number of food and beverage products, particularly nuts, fish, and coffee.
What are the agricultural products or technology innovations that New Zealand hopes to bring to Vietnam in the near future?
Well, I think there are a number of things that we can look to maybe work together with Vietnam, particularly in the agricultural sector. And we have technology and knowledge and skills in agriculture that could be applied in Vietnam. But maybe one of the greatest opportunities is in the area of education in the agricultural sector. Okay. We have very good tertiary, agricultural tertiary educations in New Zealand that we could maybe look to work closer together with and hopefully get the integration between Vietnam and New Zealand going much better than we have in the past.
Okay. Is that the directions that you are looking forward to for Vietnam, New Zealand's cooperation?
Well, this has to be a two-way partnership.
Okay.
This is not just about New Zealand coming to Vietnam and talking about what we do, but also we'd like to see some visitors coming to New Zealand to look at what we do and also look at cross-border investment. So how can an investment by Vietnamese in New Zealand help strengthen the relationships between our two countries, and how can New Zealand companies look to invest in Vietnam? So the visit here really is about learning more about Vietnam. It is about also maybe helping Vietnam understand a bit more about New Zealand.
Right.
And when we have these conversations, then we know that partnerships can be formed.
So have you learned anything, do we have any products that attract you during this trip?
Well, you do. You certainly do. I was in the wet markets looking at all of your fruit and vegetables, some of the fruits you have. And if I look at the dragon fruit, I know that we've had a collaborative partnership between Vietnam and New Zealand that's developed a new variety of dragon fruit.
Okay.
And that's a really good example of how we've used some expertise in New Zealand with some a really traditional product here in Vietnam, and we've actually benefited both countries.
During this trip, you visited a dairy farms in Nghệ An Central Province of Vietnam. Could you please elaborate more about this trip and the cooperation between New Zealand and Vietnamese companies in milk production?
We've seen a couple of very good examples, and one in particular was the TH Dairy and factory that they've brought in New Zealand cows, about 20,000 New Zealand cows. They've got them on farms and with New Zealand Veterinary Service and trying to adapt them to tropical conditions. So this is a really good example of where we see expertise and products and services from New Zealand working hand in hand with local expertise in Vietnam, and then using that combined experience to export those products to other markets as well.
As part of a New Zealand group of veterinary experts in the TH milk factory, Craig Tanner came to the central province of Nghệ An 3 years ago to take care of some 20,000 New Zealand cows which were imported here. He also worked alongside with his Vietnamese colleagues in transferring related technology, improving the overall quality of the cows, as well as sharing his experiences learned in New Zealand.
There are a number of steps that we take to ensure that the cows are made as comfortable as we can make them, and a lot of those relate to cooling systems that we have in place in the shed and cooling systems that we have in the milking parlour. It is still something that we are learning about and improving as best we can every day, but certainly from the point of view of cow comfort and best living conditions for the cows, it's something that we are giving very high attention to.
Aside from importing technology and notable final agro products including meat, fruits and dairy products, another model in collaboration between the two countries is fresh milk made in New Zealand under the brand Twin Counts by the Vietnamese producer Vinamilk.
Chúng tôi đánh giá rất cao cái sản phẩm này bởi vì thứ nhất là chất lượng sản phẩm của sản phẩm Vinamilk ở New Zealand là đạt tiêu chuẩn quốc tế và tiêu chuẩn của New Zealand. Cái thứ hai, giá bán là hợp lý, và cái nữa là cái bản thân cái thương hiệu Vinamilk đối với người tiêu dùng Việt Nam cũng đã có cái sự thân quen rồi. Và đó là một trong những lợi thế của sản phẩm này khi tiếp cận với thị trường Việt Nam.
After mango and rambutan, Vietnamese dragon fruit has made its way to New Zealand market following the official assurance program for the export of dragon fruits from Vietnam to New Zealand signed in May this year. This makes Vietnam the first and only country exporting dragon fruit to New Zealand.
I think the new varieties project that we have going at the moment, which is about research into development and commercialization of new dragon fruit varieties. It's a really interesting project that we have down in the south of Vietnam. Again, doing this together, New Zealand and Vietnam, taking on the world third markets to send Vietnamese fruits around the world.
Indeed, these collaborations are not limited to developing two-way trade between Vietnam and New Zealand. By improving each country's capability in the agriculture sector, it is hoped that their agro-produce can penetrate the regional and global markets.
Could you please elaborate more on New Zealand's current agriculture trade policies with regards to Vietnam?
Well, we're very fortunate that we've had a very strong partner with Vietnam, particularly in the ANZFTA agreement. So that's the ASEAN, Australia, New Zealand Free Trade Agreement.
Right.
And this is a very good trade agreement, an agreement that we think could be used as a template for many other agreements around the world.
Okay.
And that has really now started to increase the engagement between the two countries. In fact, we've seen in the last 5 years since the agreement's been signed, we've seen two-way trade increase significantly, increased 100% over the last 5 years.
Okay.
And once we get the full implementation of ANZFTA, then I'm confident that those trade numbers will increase significantly more. We're also working with Vietnam and the Trans-Pacific Partnership,
Okay.
Another very good and very valuable trade agreement for the Asia-Pacific region. And so these things are really just the start of a government-to-government arrangement that will allow commercial companies to do much more business.
With the ongoing negotiations of the Trans-Pacific Partnerships and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, what are the opportunities for agricultural cooperation between New Zealand and Vietnam in the future?
Well, these two trade negotiations that are currently underway, TPP and RCEP, are vitally important for the integration in the Asia-Pacific region. And both of them bring in various nations that are crucially important to the future of agricultural trade in particular. Okay. So in TPP we have, importantly, America and Japan as the two big players, along with the other 10 member countries. And then in RCEP we also have the ASEAN and then the 6 extra countries, including Japan, Korea, India, China, Australia and New Zealand.
Right.
So we actually do have a view that if we can get these regional trade agreements to come together and to start to deliver some real value, that we can use these as a means of bringing the World Trade Organization Doha around to completion. So there's a strategy and thinking behind these regional agreements that we think can really lead to a lot more in global terms.
Well, once again, thank you very much for taking your time to join us in our studio today.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay. As Vietnam and New Zealand celebrates 40 years of diplomatic relations next year, the two countries look forward to strengthen the diplomatic ties, especially in the agriculture sector, where both Vietnam and New Zealand have strengths and potential for further bilateral trade and cooperation. And that's it for our show today. Thank you very much for tuning in. You can always log on to vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go to rewatch our programs. From our team here in Hanoi, until next time.